we jump into the message, I'd like to read the text Emily Whitney will be speaking on, Matthew 6:19-24 from the English Standard Version Bible. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
I think it would be helpful if we could just admit, right from the beginning, a holy moment of confession, if you will. We don't like to talk about money, do we? Some of you might already be fearful when you heard the passage that this is the part of the One Project where we pass around the offering plate and we plead for your money. We inwardly groan when we know that the sermon is going to be on stewardship because, well, we've all been there, right? We've sat there, or maybe we've even preached uninspiring messages, the call to the management of God's resources. And I bet there are some in this room who have fumbled with something in their laps during guilt-laden appeals to empty our pockets as the congregation sings, "Take my silver and my gold, not a mite will I withhold." But I think that we don't like to talk about money because at our core, we are really uncomfortable at having to look at and evaluate the ways we spend, save, and give money. I think we'd rather go back to the passages about murder and adultery. We'd really like to pretend that we could divorce faith and finances, or at very least, keep it a personal, private matter. But Jesus does not avoid challenging subjects, does he? And he does not circumvent confronting people and their issues with money. In fact, some commentators note that Jesus talked more about money than any other subject, except for maybe the kingdom of heaven. That's a lot. And so yet again, when we come to Matthew chapter 6, Jesus again addresses both faith and finances. And he does so by making three comparisons. First, he contrasts two treasures, then two eyes, and lastly, two masters. And as I've spent time immersed in these scriptures the last few months, I've come to see them not in the burdensome context of fear and guilt that often surround our speaking and preaching about money, but rather I see these three comparisons, treasures, eyes, and masters, more like three notes of a chord. Three notes of a chord in a song that God has sung throughout the pages of Scripture and throughout time. And this song is an invitational song, a love song, if you will, as God invites us into his story. As God invites us to live fully committed lives. As he invites us to be all in. And so as Jesus does this, he talks about two treasures and he connects it with our very hearts. As he speaks about two eyes, he talks about its effect on the whole self, one's very soul. And as he talks about service to one master, he says there is only one you can serve with all that you are, with all of your strength. And as Jesus spoke these three notes, I think that it must have sounded familiar to the Jews. For it is reminiscent of another chord in God's invitational song, a chord that Jesus, the Old Testament scholar, knew well, for he quotes and paraphrases it throughout his ministry. The Jews knew it well, for it's part of a prayer called the Shema, which they say daily even now. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength." And I find the similarity in tone between Deuteronomy chapter 5 and 6 and Matthew 5 and 6 to be striking. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, there is this declaration of God's law. And then in Deuteronomy 6 comes this 3-note chord to be completely committed to God. Heart, soul, strength, all in. In Matthew 5, Jesus declares he is the fulfillment of the law. And he does what he does so well throughout the Sermon on the Mount. He takes their previous understanding and he expands it and applies it to what it looks like lived out in his kingdom now. And so he does this when we come to Matthew 6. Again, a 3-note chord calling for fully committed lives, calling God's people to be all in. And as Jesus does this, he expands it and applies it to what it looks like lived out now. And uncomfortable or not, it involves our finances. And I find the language we use interesting. When we speak of someone that's all in, when we speak of someone that loves, when we speak of someone that is fully committed, have you noticed we use financial terms? We say things like they are fully invested in the cause. He has bought into the vision. She is sold out for that purpose. And when we use these words, we speak to a larger reality that when we love, when we are all in, when we are fully committed, it does involve our finances. And so Jesus speaks of this all-in commitment. First of all, he speaks of 2 treasures. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Here, Jesus is not addressing whether money is good or bad, whether we should have it or not. He's addressing where we invest it. And there is not just the prohibition to store up treasure, but the petition to store up treasure, to invest richly in the kingdom of heaven. And this word store up can mean to amass, to accumulate, to collect. In our terminology, we may say to stockpile. And this term to me speaks not just of a minimal investment, but of a rich investment. It speaks to a rich, extravagant, abundant, wholehearted storage of kingdom currency. To store up treasure in heaven is the call to participate in the generous, lavish heart of God, and to participate in his redemptive, beautiful work in the kingdom now. And this is where I think our messages about giving fall short. And this is where I think Jesus is trying to expand our typical constructs of giving. See, we're really good at calling for the 10%, aren't we? And if we're really bold, maybe 3 to 5% offering. We call people to the minimum as if it is the totality of faithfulness. When God's goal, while 10% is a great place to start, that's just it. It's the start. And God's goal is our whole heart, invested richly in his work in the kingdom now. So maybe, just maybe, when God speaks of this rich storage of kingdom currency, maybe he's calling us beyond the 10%. Maybe he's calling us to an even greater, expanded, radically different, greater life of giving. I've been wrestling with what this looks like for me and my family. And I don't know what it will look like in your life. And it will look different for all of us. But I have been challenged to my core to learn of the financial decisions of the late Christian musician Rich Mullins. Interesting enough, given his name, Rich, he never knew how much money he actually made. He instructed his accountant to only pay him what the average person at the time made, and the rest he instructed to be given away to churches and charities. Whew. Rich did not ask, how little do I give and how much can I live on? He said, how little can I live on and how much can I give to God's work in this world? And so, as God calls us to be all in, the note rings out, ding, love me. Love me wholeheartedly, investing in my kingdom with all that you are. Secondly, Jesus speaks of two eyes. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Here Jesus addresses two conditions of the eyes, good or bad. Your translation may say single or evil, good or evil, healthy or unhealthy. But in its original context, commentator William Barclay notes that this word that we use for good has connotations and has potential usage otherwhere in Scripture. It's used to be generous or generously, a generous eye. Whereas the word that we often translate is bad is used other places in Scripture to talk about one that is ungenerous or grudging. And so here Jesus, again, I think is expanding our view of generosity. He's saying it's the lens in which you view my kingdom, either generous or ungenerous, that either fills you with light or darkness. Giving and generosity is not one thing we do as Christians. It's not just something we do at church when the offertorium plays. It's not just something we do when we get one of those invitational giving letters in the mail. It's not one thing we do, it's everything we do. It is the lens in which we view everything in God's kingdom. So, we preach a lot about grace and love and kindness and service and being abundant in these. But what if? What if the way to be abundant in these first started with viewing God's kingdom generously, even in our finances? What would that change in our lives? Might it change the way we give to the church, even when we don't agree? Might it change the way we give to those in need, even when we judge how they may use it? Might it change how we treat our employees and the benefits we offer them? Might it change how we tip at restaurants, even when the service wasn't ideal? And as Chris Oberg said this morning, might it change who we invite to the table? Might it change how we speak about others, the way we drive, the way we spend our time, the way we do everything? Generosity is not just one thing, it is the lens in which we are to view God's kingdom. And so as God calls us to be all in, the note rings out. Ding. Love me. Love me generously. Investing in a generous vision of my kingdom. Lastly, Jesus speaks of two masters. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Here, this word for money in other translations is translated as the word mammon. You cannot serve God and mammon. And this word mammon, in its most ancient form, meant anything in which one puts their trust. But in Jesus' day, had been synonymous with money, wealth, and possessions. And here Jesus, he ups the ante. He makes the issue of money a lot more serious, for he personifies money. It is not just a mere resource to be managed. It is a potential power and master with the ability to control. It's serious. And Jesus talks about money, mammon. He uses this word mammon one other place in Scripture. In Luke 16, he gives this parable of the shrewd manager. And he makes this interesting statement. He says we are to use unrighteous mammon for eternal purposes. So we are to use it, but not serve it. To me, what this says is the power of money in all of our lives must be placed on the altar of God so that it can die and be consecrated and dedicated for a new usage in God's kingdom now. So what would it look like? What would it look like if money was placed on the altar in your life and you were free? You were free from money as your master. You were free for the desires to possess. You were free from constantly comparing what you had with what someone else had. You were free from stressing, striving, working for more. But a greater question is, what would it look like in your life if you were free to? Free to invest richly in the work of God. Free to give generously into the lives of others. Free to serve God as your one and only master. What would it look like in your life? And so, as Jesus calls us to be all in, the note rings out. Ding. Love me. Love me and invest in my kingdom, serving me with all of your strength. So what would it look like in your life to be all in? God's invitational song plays on. The notes ring, ding, ding, ding. Love me, heart, soul, strength, ding, ding, ding. Love me, treasures, eyes, and service. Love me. We pick up the familiar invitational song again in the life of Peter. As similarly, it continues, I believe, in our life today. The call comes and the notes ring out as Jesus says to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. What does Jesus say? Feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Jesus answered, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Take care of my sheep. A third time, the note rings out. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus had to ask him a third time, Lord, you know all these things. You know I love you. And Jesus simply says, feed my sheep. So in each of our lives, the song plays and the notes ring out. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Amen.
Emily states that Jesus is not against wealth, but is more concerned with where we store our wealth, on earth or in heaven. What are some of the common treasures we pursue that can only be stored on earth? What are those that can be stored in heaven? Emily discusses the text that states that we cannot serve two masters. While we may love Jesus, do we think in terms of Jesus all? When you think about where you devote your time and your money, what other masters are you tempted to serve in your life?
There are times when the weight of reality stifles dreams, and the plight of present circumstance cripples ambition. But it's in these times when we must dare to dream. Not just naive optimism, but focused determination, with the courage to hope matched by a willingness to labor. Our dreams are our conviction that there is a life more abundant than this one, that we can reach every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. A dream is a declaration that I am not satisfied with the status quo, and I am not discouraged by the woes of this world. I dream of one who has overcome the world, whose dreams to save us produced the incarnation, the cross, and the resurrection. I dream of one who cares for us, prays for us, and dreams for us. And he empowers us to dream as well. I dream of a church that is alive with the love of Christ, where grace revives and mercy restores. A sanctuary for anyone and everyone all the time, where the voice of God is heard, echoed, and spread across the world, where the scriptures are employed to win souls, not arguments. I dream of a church where practice doesn't inform theology, but theology informs practice, where we are as pioneering and prophetic as our founders, and as biblically sound and culturally relevant as the apostles. I dream of an 11 o'clock worship hour across the world that is as colorful in expressions of worship as the cultures under the sky. That even if it is varied in practice, it is always united in purpose. I dream of a church that substitutes prayer for politics. I dream of a church that is mission-driven, people-focused, and Christ-centered. I dream of a church that's a church.
This is my dream. This is my journey.
If you'd like more information on the One Project, or you would enjoy watching one of these presentations again, please visit them at www.theoneproject.org. That's www.the1project.org. If you were moved by this presentation, we would invite you to experience a One Project gathering in person. The upcoming gatherings are listed on the website. Be blessed until we meet again.